Since COVID?
What's that?
Has it been since COVID?
Yeah, it was COVID. So, I had to find something to do with myself, right? So why not reach out to people that you want to talk to that you can't actually spend time with in their rooms and have a good conversation. People were frustrated they couldn't work with their athletes anyway. So it's a good way to pass that time. But Morgan has convinced me that it's time to bring the show back. So thanks to you both for coming on. And I've known you both for a while, but not necessarily everyone listening has. So, who do you mind giving kind of a quick summary of how you like to introduce yourself?
I'll do the fast version. Andrea Hudy. I've been a strength and conditioning coach for 28 years now, I believe, going on 29 soon. I started my career, as an athlete. I played volleyball in college. That was a lifetime ago. And I've been working in sports performance ever since. I started at the University of Connecticut, where there was a lot of collaboration with the sports science department and the athletic department. I was there for 9.5 years, learned with some of the most greatest people ever, and went to the University of Kansas and again worked with great people. I was there for 15 years as assistant athletic director for sports performance, primarily with men's basketball, but I did everything except for football, which I did work with football for a little bit, but yeah. Then I went to the University of Texas for like 20 months, and then I'm back at the University of Connecticut again, where I work with women's basketball. But it's pretty cool because I'm starting my little own high performance area and working on my PhD to not just, learn the data as a coach, but learn it in a more scientific fashion and be able to present it in a more scientific way to see if the methods work, but also learn some new methods.
So, what was it like going back to UConn after an extended time away?
Every place I've been, it's been like, and I don't mean to sound corny, but it has been like family. So, yeah, there's still people that worked there a long time ago when I was there the first time, and it was just like riding a bike. You pick right back up. Operationally, things are a little bit different than other places, but I think each place that I've worked has both pros and cons in terms of challenges and advantages. So yeah, it's been really good. It was a little weird at first, uh, but it's nice to be back east.
Well, I got when you first started looking at like adding us back in when you went there, I got a pretty quick email from someone in administration that was Hoody's back, all caps, all exclamation points. So if that's any indication, it sounds like everyone was super stoked you were back. So uh,
Yeah, and again, I work with some of the best people ever, and to be able to work with some of the best women's basketball players in the world, that's pretty cool too. And they're just, I don't have to coach work ethic. I don't have to coach and teach all these things. I come in and they do what they're supposed to, and it's a pretty cool environment because they pick each other up and they empower each other. It's a
nice,
special place.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Clint Martin, who are
Yes.
you and why are you here?
I don't know why you asked me on to be honest. Let me give you the background. So I've been coaching, been in college. This is my 10th season. It's a big deal. It's my 10th season in college. I started at Iowa State, which is my alma mater. I ran track at Iowa State previously. There, I worked with men's basketball. Got to run in a Hootie a couple times. Worked with wrestling and also worked with women's swimming and diving. Then I did a short stint, 9 months at University of Nevada, where I worked with men's and women's hoops and also tennises out there. Then I wound up down here at the University of Texas. I'm just going into my 8th track season now. I work with the track program, men's swimming, and women's golf as well. The programs that I work with at Texas.
And so one of the added rules, and it's loosely speaking, that you're assuming is you're actually going to help me out with this podcast nonsense. every other time we do it. So, what's your co-hosting experience like?
It's actually pretty good. I've been on a couple. I've actually been doing so many more. Yours was actually early in my stint of like podcasts, but I got on with you guys pretty early when I started doing it. I haven't really stopped since. So
nice. So when we were talking about what we would discuss, I went back to a text I got from Hudy about LTAD, long-term athletic development, and so
don't read those texts.
Well, there's a lot of things I might want to edit out, but as a subject, it's a great thing to talk about. So, but maybe this is like my philosophy degree getting in the way. But do you want to define for everybody what that actually is? Because it seems like one of those terms that people might throw out there, but then when you get into the nuances about it, you may not end up talking about the same things.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that, but I live it. So, hopefully I do it some justice here, but there's early specialization in sport and late specialization sports. Early specialization sports are those that obviously are done earlier in their careers, things like gymnastics, where the athletes tend to be younger and specialize earlier. The problem is basketball, for me, and I don't know, Clint, where we are with where you put track in there. I assume it's a late specialization sport, just because muscle mass and experience and skill development in those areas and tactical things. So that takes a while to learn for the most part, but I'm seeing, and more, probably in the last 5 to 10 years, I just keep seeing these people who come into college and they're already hurt. And it's like, the late specialization that's supposed to be late specialization is now early specialization. So when I ask my athletes how long they've been playing organized basketball all year round, they're telling me 5 years old. That's a problem, because I keep seeing more and more injuries, and it's like I'm supposed to build a robust athlete, and these athletes are hurt from the start. So it's like, how do you build on a broken foundation? You can't. And there's like, I feel like I'm doing workarounds on everything. So, late specialization is obviously later. So you're talking about specializing between the ages of 16 and 18, but these kids are specializing at 5 years old all year. So we're seeing these injuries that are just bizarre that people are dealing with at this point, whether it be, and COVID didn't help. It didn't help at all, because I just see the most random injuries, and it feels like a perfect storm of people not being healthy and not optimizing performance.
And so when you talk about people specializing, just to make it a little more clear for people, you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, but very specifically, all they do is play basketball. It's not that they're not an athlete
they're great athletes
or doing other sports. It's just at a very early age, they do one thing and one thing only. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, and I worked with people might know Joel Embiid. He plays for the Sixers, and Joel, by the time he got to Kansas and started developing, he had played soccer, he'd played volleyball, and you could see him learning the sport of basketball tactically by feeding off all those other experiences. And I don't think people do that now, or I don't see it happening as much as I used to. But boy, he could do anything. He was mobile. He was strong. We built on that. But now it's just these people are locked into these patterns, and you see the same injuries over and over and over again.
So, Clint, does that mirror what you see? Like, because obviously Hudy's handling hoops. Does that mirror what you see in the sports that you're handling at UT?
Yeah, absolutely. Really in track specifically, I the last 5 years, I think Hudy, it's right on. Like the last 5 years, I've seen a real influx of freshmen across the board. And I talk to a lot of coaches around the country. I see a lot of freshmen that come in more broken than I had seen prior. I actually had a conversation with Derek Hansen a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him, because he works with all populations, pro, all the way down to younger athletes, like, why do you think this is? And specialization in sport was part of it, but he also thought specialization in the weight room was another piece of it. Because we come from, when I was younger, I was fortunate to have a strength coach in high school. Now, obviously, they're a lot more prevalent. A lot of people go to private trainers, what have you. And I think they're chasing the output. They're just looking at the outputs and the things that look cool and the things that are awesome on Instagram. When you're 16 and 17, you're more resilient, so you can get through some of those things. But if I have a freshman come in with 2 blown out hamstrings, I have to take a step back. Like, what have you been doing? Because when we were 17 and we were just running, or we were doing football, or we were playing tag, or whatever we were doing, we didn't blow hamstrings. So it's really interesting to see the difference now. I mean, we have to really look at those things and figure out, hey, let's get you back to zero before we even try to take the first step. So that's just something we've definitely seen in the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's a great point too about the other thing was I feel like women are at a disadvantage anyway. One, because they don't receive formal training as much as men do, and there are very few women that I see that actually receive formal training. So it's an uphill battle, and it's unfortunate, in my opinion. We have probably just a handful of kids or athletes that actually are trained, and have the base strength to survive. I always talk to Dr. Kramer, and he's like, Hudy, if they're not robust and they don't have the tissue density to withstand the sport will show you. So injury rates are going up, both men and women, but I feel like women are at a disadvantage anyway because they don't have the exposure to training.
If you were to be able to like wave a magic wand and sort of start the conversation about what young athletes should be doing sort of early enough, like who would you have that conversation with, and like what advice would you give to people?
Avery Feigenbaum is a huge proponent of adolescent strength training. Anybody who probably has any experience working with younger kids, even phys ed's been taken out of schools, and I think that's a disadvantage too, because people don't move, and movement is medicine in my mind. As I get older, it's more and more medicine, and Avery Feigenbaum's one of the leading researchers, and I'm embarrassed to say that I forgot his name, out of Boston. There's a guy out of Boston. I'll look it up right now, and I will get you his name. But he's great with long-term athletic development and developing youth athletes. It's just, and then, if you look at those graphs of the long-term athletic, the Canadian model, like women should start strength training at peak height velocities. So that's when they start menstruating, between the ages of 11 and 14-ish, but I get women in college, and you tell them to go bench press, and they don't know how to set it up. They don't know how to set up squat. And that's happening more and more often, and they're saying, well, I have a trainer. And I was like, well, go fire your trainer. If you can't do the basic stuff. But I'm a basic person though, too. Like I want to master, or try to get them to master the basics and be consistent with it.
Clint, any thoughts? Like what would you end up saying to?
I mean, if you could wave a magic wand, and I don't want to put everybody in a box, but I feel like we have to look at parents somewhat, because I think a lot of I don't know if Hudy, if you see it as well, but a lot of that push to specialize comes from parents, especially in the hoops world, because it's that NBA dream, and I got to hustle and I got to grind and I got to try to make it to the league, and they kind of get that focus, and that comes from somewhere. Sometimes it's the athletes, absolutely, but that comes from somewhere. That support comes from somewhere. So I think if you could wave a magic wand, I think it'd be the parents that could really help benefit their athletes to be more well-rounded and therefore, in my mind, healthier the longer they can continue in whatever sport they may be in.
Well, you look at the statistics, and there aren't going to be that many people that are investing in their kids so competitively to make it to that level, and it's bizarre.
When you say more well-rounded, there's obviously, like, there are experts in the field that certain people can reach out to, but are there more generic guidelines you would give parents, such as, like, we'll talk about the role of play? Like, kids just don't go out and play anymore. Like, I remember we would get, like, the neighborhood crew together, and it was like, are we playing basketball today? Are we playing football? Our timeouts were like just drinking water from a hose and getting back at it. Now you have a situation where everyone's trying to make club teams, and then they're trying to make the best team within that club team. Do you guys have thoughts on how you would recommend parents handle sort of the world they have to navigate with a young athlete?
I think, cool if I jump in? I think she's locked in. She's looking for that research. I think even just talking about being well-rounded. So I work with a lot of different professional athletes as well. When we get out of track season, we've been doing the same things. I'm talking about the same like motor pathways, like over and over and over for 9-10 months. Some of my athletes have been competing since January, and they're still going. Diamond Leagues in Brussels this week. They've been racing since February and January. So when we get down the season, I don't want you to touch a track. I don't want you to go run any 100. We don't need to do that. We've done that so much. We really don't, with my track athletes, we don't really touch anything that we may do in the weight room. We don't do that in the off season. We try to fill the holes of the redundancies that we've been doing. So I don't want you to go touch a track. I want you to go get in some sand. I want you to jump in the pool. I want you to go do anything else. Literally go play tag. Go do anything else than what you've been doing, because you build on those patterns and you get really strong in those patterns, and that's what we do. But then you start to have cracks and holes because those patterns aren't heavy. And these are athletes that are very, very special. So for 16, 17-year-old, the world is your oyster. Like, get out there and do those things. I think the more exposures you can have, the more prepped you can be for those specialization periods. And at that point, you're still growing, you're still learning. The younger you are, the more exposure you can have. Athleticism, there's just a lot that can be said about that when you get into a specialized sport.
So do you feel like most parents, or even potentially coaches who are working with younger athletes like that, would be shocked to hear you say that you're telling people don't get on the track?
Probably. I think they probably would. It's funny. I don't know how many people know this, but I work with Kenny Harrison, she just had the world record in the short hurdles until this summer. Actually, she had it for a number of years. She was a phenomenal gymnast when she was younger. Most people don't know that. She's been a world record holder in the short hurdles, and she's been doing it for a long time. She's coming up on her 30th birthday. She is very, very specialized in what she does. But she was a really, really good gymnast. Like, she didn't just run track. That wasn't just the only thing she did. You can still see it every now and then. She'll, you used to be a gymnast. But, she hasn't done gymnastics competitively in years. So it's very interesting. Same thing with, I work with Jenna Prandini. She's a really good 200-meter runner, made the last 2 Olympic teams. But she was a good long jumper in college. She hasn't touched long jump in a long time. But we'll be doing bounds. And I'm like, whoa, you still got that, but you're a really good 200-meter runner. That's what you specialize in. She's coming up on her 30th birthday as well. But like, the things we need to do outside of season don't have to look like what they look like in season, because of redundancies and then, like I said, the holes and the gaps that you have to fill those. Otherwise, they're going to show up, like Hudy said.
Hudy, welcome back.
Thank you.
We were just talking about what, like, you would end up, like, sort of more simplified guidance, like talking to parents, right, or even like youth coaches, in terms of what you might have athletes do in the off season. Because Clint was pointing out that he'll tell some of his athletes, like, stay away from the track. And if I remember correctly on your Instagram, I saw some paddleboarding going on. Like, how do you handle your athletes in the off season to keep from being overloaded with just one thing.
Yeah, we're just trying to expose them to movement variability. It's almost like when we're in season, I do the most unsport specific basketball program, whatever that is. But we work on those underlying motor abilities that if I was to do more, plyometric work or more quick ballistic movements, it's like that just is going to do more harm, in my opinion. So we offset basketball movements to create health. And paddleboarding was great for Paige. Unfortunately, she got hurt a couple of days later. But it's like, how do you stop that moving train? And that train is going really fast. And again, it's hard to have an impact when that train is moving. So I don't know. We end up trying to do more gymnastic stuff. And have you ever seen a 7-footer try to do gymnastics? It's not pretty, but those are skills that they don't know and they've never learned. But even just getting them on the floor and doing floor work, which they don't like to bend, so that takes effort. And I don't know if I've ever seen a gymnast dunk though. So on that case, on the other hand, yeah, it's just it is. I think there's an epidemic going on, and something needs to be done about it. And I don't know what that is.
Do either of you feel like sort of the way culturally we've pushed competition further down into lower levels and then sort of, maybe this is unfair, but implied that that is the path forward? Like at the end of the day, athletes that have a dream literally want to end up in positions where they would work with like each of you in their respective sports. Any thoughts on how you slow that down or redirect the train, so to speak?
On my whiteboard, right, that you know about.
There's got to be a whiteboard.
All I have is the word, like at the very top of it, I have in caps is time. It's going to take time. And that's that. Some people say, what is that time? And I don't know, and it took, when I came back here, it was like, it took a long time for me to feel really good about a workout. It was over a year for me to feel good about what I was, implementing. It took over a year for me to walk away from a workout and be like, yeah, that was it. 56 weeks it took. And you're trying to teach and undo and redo, but also make them perform well or help them perform well. So it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Clint, how about you?
I'll talk about the collegiate model specifically. Like when I get athletes, like I know I'm going to have, well, hopefully with the transfer portal, who knows, but hopefully you get them for 4 years. So I try to look at a freshman as like a quad for the Olympics. Like I want you to be really good at the end of this year, but I want you to be your best 4 years from now when we get the championship season. And I have that long to get you there. So when I see athletes day one, they may be really, really talented, but like Hudy said, they're really untrained at this point. So I could do something super specific, something that they could really handle, but they don't necessarily need that stressor because they had no stressors, period. So I could give them a lower stressor, which may not be up to what they could do, but they're still going to get the adaptation that I'm looking for. So therefore, that gives me more tools in my tool belt to be able to get them there 4 years from now. If I have a kid come in, an athlete come in who's phenomenal, like you might want to be like, whoa, I can do this and I can do this because the athlete can respond to that. But if you throw the kitchen sink at them, where do you go next? Right? So you can't do anything beyond like the most, right? So why give them that kind of response or that kind of stressor when, yes, they would get adaptation, but they get adaptation from really anything because they haven't been exposed to it at that point. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Dr. Kramer says that women need to squat 1.74 times their body weight and men need to squat 2.0 times their body weight to just start to participate in their sport. I don't know how many athletes that I have, maybe 2 that could do that currently, you know? And I have one that's a phenomenal athlete, and she's trained, and you could tell that she's trained and she's been trained the right way. And she can dunk. I bet that she'll make a highlight reel this year on ESPN, and you can tell that she's put in her time. But for others, they're like, again, we're competing and we're supposed to win, and these kids are playing, 5 months into their career, and they're not even close to being able to do that.
Well, that's one of the things that's fascinating about like a metric like that. Like there's I can't remember who it was. I read a paper once, and it talked about basically how magical being able to squat like 2x your body weight was. And just in a way, it was sort of this metric that led to an understanding that you had all these exponential gains athletically. But when you were dealing with particularly a sport like basketball, it also is pretty skilled heavy. Like, how do you end up trying to parse out with an athlete, like how to prioritize their time, like in the weight room versus
Right.
or versus learning the offense?
As Clint was saying, to the college model, it's tough because they're expected to play and develop all year round. So it's like anymore in the summer, it's like I don't even want them to pick up a ball, but that doesn't fly, right? And these guys probably play, these women and these men probably in college probably play more than the pros do, practice more than the pros do all year round. Um, so yeah, that's the model that I go to is we're going to expose them to the weight room every day, and it's going to be part of the practice culture, and we're just going to get there, and again, some people might disagree with the fact that you have to squat 1.74 times your body weight, which is fine. They can disagree with that, but I'll hit them with every exercise we possibly can. And but you can tell a difference between who can squat that and who can't. 100%. But then again, you get a kid that's hurt from high school, and they come in, and you can't even put a bar on their back because something happened. So then how are you going to build that strength? It's tough.
So when freshmen come in, because obviously you're aware, because we're talking about it, like this is a problem. So when someone arrives at like each of your doorsteps, right, and it's like day one, I'm like, what are you both looking at? Like, how are you just starting to assess even just like simple movement quality? Is it weight room? Is it watching how they move on the floor? Combination?
For the way I'll work, we'll stick with track because that's kind of where I've been. The way it's nice for me here, I get 2.5 weeks of exposure to the athletes before they do anything with their coaches. So we actually just finished up all of our testing, and I mean our sports science testing battery is pretty extensive. It's different for every unit group, but we do that. I'll go through like power output testing. I'll do Bosco jump. We just finished that this week. We do force decks. We're looking at hamstrings for all of our power athletes. We're looking at movement screens. I have my own movement screen that I do. It's my warm up. Kind of follow the Dan Path model, but the way I've built it, it's a movement screen for me to find things in specific event groups. So we'll do all that before we touch a barbell. Like we're just trying to see, hey, obviously you're really good, but what gets you from point A to point B? And let's see kind of what's going on inside of that. I always say the body will tell you what's going on if you listen. So that's just me trying to listen and figure out, hey, who is this athlete? Obviously you're good, but why are you good? You can have 2 athletes run the exact same time at 100, but they might get there very, very differently. So I'm trying to figure out what makes this athlete go, and then we want to enhance those qualities, but then also figure out like what some of their limitations are and make sure they're not something that turns into an injury or something that holds them back when it comes to athletic development going forward.
Yeah, I'll put them on a force plate, and we look at balance. We look at counter movement jump. My functional movement screen is how well they move in the weight room. But can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. Okay. Our training is testing. Everything we do, we look at reps, we coach the rep. There's always feedback. Um, we do force velocity profiles on a number of exercises, but we just collaborated with the Institute of Sports Medicine to try to screen out, that doesn't mean that it's going to prevent an injury, but at least it can give us something to focus on, to add correctives, to have the athlete focus on to get better. So there's always work to be done. And it doesn't obviously end with, if you don't squat that, 1.74, you're never going to be good. It doesn't end there, but it's a goal. And if they get there, then we just push for velocity, and it's not about how much can they squat, it's how well can they squat and how fast can they squat. So there's 1,000 different tests that we can look at on every day. Not tests, but training. I mean, again, it's repetition. And if we the more exposure we get to them, I think the more impact that we can have. But then again, it lends to, and I'll bring this up because I think it needs to be said too. In our college model, I think things are changing, and they're changing drastically, and they're fast because, I'm the sports scientist, I'm the strength and conditioning coach, I'm collaborating and working with the athletic trainer. It's like, if I looked at my job description, data collection isn't part of it, but it needs to be. And if we're supposed to advance, then the world needs to advance in what we're doing. So I think EliteForm is a huge part of that, which is awesome.
Clint, how are you guys handling data collection down at UT?
I think we do a really good job. I'm going to brag on our staff, not just the sports performance team, but like our sports science department, our athletic training department. We have a pretty big lab. We have, I believe, 6 full-time sports scientists now, which is awesome. When I got down here, we had 1, and then he left my first year. So I was stuck with this technology that I didn't know how to use. So I was like, let me spend some time. Dove into EliteForm. I was finishing my master's at that point. So I dove into EliteForm pretty headfirst, and also 1080 sprint at the same time, really looking at power outputs and how they transfer into sprinting. And I was like, hey, this is really good. I'm actually glad there's nobody here, so I had to learn this thing. Then we hired, obviously, Travis Wayne.
Yeah, got shoved in the deep end of the pool.
I got shoved in the deep end, but it was the best thing that could have happened to me. Because now here I am going into year 8, and I have 7 years of data collected from all of my event groups. And I can break those things down. I can look at power outputs for my high performer and figure out, hey, this is a threshold that I've seen for my 11-1 females. Like, this is the power output we're going to have to produce if we want to get to that level. So now at this point, we have that data collected for a lot of different tests. So specifically hamstrings, specifically bone densities, body compositions, like a bunch of different things that we know matter. And those things are non-negotiable. So we've got a lot of data that we have collected, and it's been very beneficial for us to, one, make sure we can be healthy and even able to practice and compete. But then also we have, hey, this is what we need to do if we want to hit some of your goals on the track as well.
Track, that's cool, because track is more, it's cut and dry. It's cut and dry.
It's so objective that it makes my job really, really fun. I try to make the weight room as objective as possible, since that's what their sport is. Same with swimming. Like you said, are we looking at squat? Like, your squat depth's a little different than that person's. Your weights are relatively, but what's your power output? Like, your relative power output, what's that look like for your event group, for my females, for my males? So for me, those things are awesome because that's what I'm training. Like, obviously we're going to get strong. That's my job. That's in my job title. But when we get into championships, I want to see our power trending in the best we've ever been in championships. And championships are the same time every year. So on the track, the training is going to match up with what they've been doing or historically have done at that time of the year. Same thing in the weight room. I want to see, hey, when you start PRing last year outside, what was your power output? Okay, we want to be there or better when we go into that time this next year. So that's why we do the Bosco jump test. Just finished that. We'll look at, hey, what do you do from a static jump position? What do you do from a counter movement? How do you organize with your arm? And we're looking at what your power potential could be. What was it last year when you got here? Now you've had a year to train. If you've been off for a couple months, what does that look like? Is it different than when you were on training? Are you really good with reactivity, or are you better from like a static position? You're good with being strong. So for us, we can use the data and we can look at exactly what it's helping us do or how it's hurting us on the track.
Well, one of the things when we were all texting about, like, talking about the subject that I thought was going to be fascinating is, like, as Hudy just pointed out, like, track, it's right there.
It's right there.
Like, your time is your time, for example. But basketball, arguably, a bit more nuanced, right? Like,
Yeah, but I would tell you there's very similar, because, people get paid to run fast and jump high. And basketball is very similar to that, right? But there's game concepts and what tactical things.
And that's exactly where I was going. Like, those things are true. But with track, it's kind of harder as an athlete to maybe not, like, avoid that fact. And so I was just curious, like, do you actually tell your athletes, like, so Dr. Kramer's numbers, like, are you giving him
Absolutely. The thing is with me, I want to empower the women that I work with to say, hey, I worked with Sue Bird and I worked with Diana Taurasi, two women that are like at the upper echelon of basketball. And I worked with them in the early 2000s. Yeah. Late 90s, early 2000s. And they're still playing. And hey, I'm here to teach you to not only do well here, but I'm also teaching you health and performance for a lifetime, because I want your careers to be longer than theirs, And as Clint was saying, the trends, we're following the trends. And what parameter, though, like what athletic parameter actually shows that you're a good basketball player? I don't know if there are many that actually are a direct correlation to scoring the ball. But can we build a robust athlete who has the tissue density to survive the reactive nature of the sport? Because I'll tell you, the reactive nature of the sport, and Clint can probably tell you, those long jumpers, those triple jumpers, you're fighting a battle of injury there, because jumping is not, and reactive stuff is not easy on the body.
Very violent.
It's super violent. And yeah, I mean, in the fact that basketball players don't like to buy into what we're trying to do, like, you can't, there's no time for that.
Clint, does that mirror, like, some of the things you see kind of across campus there as well?
Yeah, I think for Olympic sport culture, it's a little easier than probably hoop culture. Even when I was in hoops, like, I dealt with the same thing, Hudy. You'll have some guys who love it. You'll have some guys who just absolutely hate it. I don't really see that as much in Olympic sports, and that's across the board. Even at this point now with the women's golf program here, we've changed the culture to more of a training culture. When I first started working with them 6 years ago, they were kind of risk averse from the weight room, because they trained a lot and they were really good golfers, and they never really trained in the weight room. So they didn't really see it as a necessity, which is fine. And that's just an education piece. And then when I started working with them, I talked to their head coach. He was like, yeah, this summer, let's train a little bit. Most of them are going to be gone playing tournaments. I was like, okay, cool. So I had 3 athletes who weren't getting invited to those tournaments. They were kind of like our developmental athletes, if you would. They stayed the entire summer, and we just trained. And it's the first time they'd ever been exposed to the weight room consistently in their entire lives. Obviously, they got better. And better in golf from the weight room standpoint is club head speed. Like, the ball started moving for them, right? So it gave them more agility to be able to do more on the course. And their coach was, all right, this is awesome. Let's train. So we've been able to change the culture here with golf, and they love to train. They come in, we were in 6 a.m. this morning. They come in at 6 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And we train all year, and that's been really cool for us. Track, we don't really have they know what time it is. Like, we have to get to work, and they know that. And once you get here, the ones who have been here, my head coach has been here 5 years. Those athletes are very bought in. So our first year guys are 5th year athletes now because of the COVID year, and they've been trained I would say, hopefully say pretty well for the past 5 years. So when the freshmen come and they see the kind of work that these athletes are doing, they see how they want to be in the weight room, in and around the weight room. I think it kind of just is easy for the buy-in from that standpoint.
This is such a cliche, but I always feel like it's right. Does a lot of it just boil down to trusting the process?
I think so.
For an athlete when they show up at your doorstep?
Absolutely. I think it comes down to trusting the process, but then also trusting the person, like trusting Hudy and trusting myself and trusting the head coach, and trusting those who've come before you to lay the foundation. I think that's a big piece of it. And obviously, like, people make this thing go around. Without the athletes, we don't have these jobs. So our job is to support them however we can. Sometimes my job doesn't look like making someone get stronger. I was there for this athlete because they needed to talk about their parent, whatever it could be. Like, I can be something. I want to provide value, however that is. Obviously, the majority of the time, it's probably going to be performance related. Sometimes it's not. But for us, like, they need to be able to trust us in and outside of the weight room.
Hudy, you're on mute, but you look very thoughtful at the moment.
My dog had surgery today and she's crying. So I'm like dying here, like trying to help her. But I'm trying to keep her quiet. Yeah. That's why I'm on mute.
Okay. Now I'm worried about the dogs.
Don't worry about a dog.
Long-term canine development. Let's talk about that. So,
right. Oh, well.
What kind of dog?
She's a puggle. And I have a puggle and a muggin. The muggin is a miniature pincher and a puggle. But the puggle is...
You ready to pick up and like put on screen, or... Gotta get it. See, it was just attention. Just needed a little attention.
Oh, she's camera shy.
Like some athletes, right?
Needs a little loving.
Yeah, so my apologies for that.
Yeah.
But I love what Clint has to say. It's great because, when people ask me who my supervisor is, I always say the athlete, because if they're not happy, the coach hears about it. And then, then I hear about it. So our customer service is the athlete, and you got to make sure that you have a relationship with them.
So that always makes me want to bring this up.
I'm going to give this dog a treat.
No, you're good. You're good. I like the personal side, so it's all good. But here's what I'm going to ask when Hudy comes back in. We'll kind of catch her up. So, you're trying to create this relationship with an athlete who may have experienced some things in getting to you that you don't necessarily feel really in their best interest, right? But they've still managed to get to UT, get to UConn, be a part of some pretty notable programs. And so that in and of itself is kind of a win for them. And then so if you fold like NIL into that, and what those conversations look like, has that changed some of the culture or the decisions you've had to make around culture?
Not for me.
Schools, or is it just there's sort of this added layer, some of it's always been there, and we're just kind of marching forward because we know we've got the good foundation in the first place?
Oh, yeah. Our coaching staff's been here for 37 years, and there's a tradition here, as there is with Texas and track and field. It actually could help, in a way, and good for them that they're making money. But it's an added stressor. Like,
for you or for them or both?
For them. It's always been a stressor for me because I do want their careers to be long. But there's some times where I'll say to somebody, man, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes right now, because there's so much pressure and it's coming from so many different areas. That was before NIL. And now after NIL, now they're getting pulled even more. So you're like, the one thing professional athletes don't have is normally they don't have classes and the stress of finals and family and parents. Like, they don't have to worry about it. But there's certainly great for them, but certainly there's an added stress there, so I think it helps our culture, doesn't hurt it.
Yeah, I think definitely where she is and definitely where I am now, like these institutions, there's so much to be said about the tradition of the programs that they already feel some sort of not commitment, but some sort of like almost duty to perform, like because that's what's expected. But there's also pressures of being at successful programs. Like you're here for a reason, so like your results need to look like that. And when they don't, like then we need to adjust or whatever that could look like. But now it's hey, also not only will I be successful, I can get paid for it. All right, cool. So I think that helps in that sense, like Hudy was saying, which is great. Like she said, great for them. Love it. So I don't think it's hurt at all by any means.
Nice. So what, like, as you sort of move forward, and I'm going back to the long-term athletic development conversation, is there a way in which, I suppose, other than like typical media, like you would envision it being effective to get the word out about some of the changes that need to be made, or do you feel like
There's a push. There's people out there. Jeremy Frisch is his name. Frisch.
the name you were looking at before?
Yeah, there are people that have been fighting a great fight for a really long time, and I feel like Lee Taft, like these people are, and those are just the ones that I know. So there's a group of people out there that are fighting a great fight, and they've been saying the same things for the last 30 years. I feel like it's their time, right? There's a platform here that they could potentially really knock it out of the park. But again, it might fall on deaf ears because there's so much invested in these kids these days. So
Well,
I hope it doesn't, but
yeah, that's what I keep coming back to, and I'm not necessarily finding the best way to phrase it. Is now with youth sports being commoditized more and more, like you have people who are working with younger age groups who that's their job, and they're now associating like building a club or what have you, an AAU team with wins, and here's where I would hope they could start to bridge a little bit, but like often they're judged by, did I have an athlete that ended up playing for UConn women's basketball? And I don't have solutions, but I'm curious how we think through creating conversations where it's not just all about those things.
Well, I would say, look, I don't know this for sure, but in my mind, where did the problem come from? It came from the sports apparel companies, right? So if the problem comes from there, the solution can come from there too. So what are these people doing to try to then counter the culture that has been created? So I would say let's push it that way, because they have the influence, they have the money, and I think that's important.
I think as we continue to move, hopefully as this investment in younger athletes continues to grow, that investment will go into performance coaching as well at that level, because that could be something where performance coaches can have, even if your athlete's going to specialize, at least they can be trained properly to kind of counteract the redundancies that they're having as they specialize in their sport. So I think hopefully that could be something that gets invested in more. I'd love to see, like she was saying, more youth athletes actually strength training. I think that'd be great. And then hopefully that could at least curb what's going on with specialization.
As long as it's around that, like youth athletes training, like with weights, like there are patterns, there's movement patterns, but it won't actually take off until there's peak height velocity. And I think that's why I had a lot of success in college men's basketball, because we got them at 18 years old, right? But unfortunately for women, it's 11 to 14. That's junior high and early high school. And I was an injured athlete, and I thought that working harder, working more was better, and that's not right. It's It's not. Working smarter is better.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's where kind of the guidance piece ends up coming in to a great degree as well. Like, I mean, wasn't at your level, but I would echo that. Like, I was an injured athlete in college and just thought, well, I'll just work really hard to get back, and all I did was set myself up all the more. Right.
And that's where I feel like I'm here for the athletes today to be like, we need time. Time is important. Like, take your time. Everybody wants to
tell them to rush.
Yeah.
I think it's harder to train, for me at least. I think it's harder to train athletes that I've worked with for a long period of time. It's harder for me to train them than the new freshman walking in the door. I have a couple athletes I've worked with for 8 or 9 years now. It's harder to train that person that I know really, really well, but they've been exposed to so many different things. It's harder for me to train that person, especially as they're getting older. Obviously, their volume can't be the same as it used to be. Their intensities probably won't look the same, but then how do you still progress? So that's harder for me than the 18-year-old who hasn't really been exposed to much, at least from a stressor from our standpoint.
So it sounds to me like when we have Tiana on the podcast, that's exactly where we need to go and talk about what that's like.
Absolutely.
What do you think? What do you think she would say after training with you for however long it's been? 7, 8 years?
We don't even need that. We don't even need to get my thoughts. We'll just ask her.
That's not very co-host of you, but
hopefully Tiana will. That's the really cool thing. Actually, whenever we had recruiting spiels at UT, I always bring up Tiana because in 2019 she won the USA Championships in the 100-meter dash, and going into that we had been doing clean sets, and she was doing triples at 77 kilos, and her outputs were 15 to 1600, and it was PRs for her across the board. And I said, Tiana, your outputs, like, she just translates power clean really well to track. It's insane. But your outputs, those are the PRs. You've never done those before. She's like, I know. I was like, what are you going to do? I'm going to PR. And it was like, that's the great thing about track. Like, when it's showing up in training and it's showing up on the track, she went and won and she PR'd, but it wasn't guesswork. We knew that was going to happen because it had been showing up for us. So that's a really cool story about us. And whenever we're getting to championships with T, I'm like, hey, what do we need our outputs to look like? She's like, yep, we got to keep trending. She always says trending. So it's like she knows like what we're looking for when we're training and what her exposure should be. So that's the pretty cool thing about her. I don't know how it works. It's so well. It doesn't work like that for all athletes, obviously. But when you get technically sound enough and you find things that do translate, it's pretty cool when you see it show up.
Nice. So Hudy, like when you were first introducing kind of what you have going on, I think there's something that we haven't touched on that folds back into some of this conversation, which is you're now offering the ability to provide some training programs to all athletes, right? Via Train Heroic, if I'm not mistaken. You want to tell people about that?
Yeah, I mean, we get asked, I'm sure Clint does too, you get asked for programs all the time, and it's hard to blindly go, yeah, here's a program. But what's, I think, important that is timing is important when we're producing these, but yeah, it's tough. It really is, because it's so specialized. You just can't hand somebody a generic program, but we're trying to hand somebody a generic program for what they feel. So what we're trying to do is, I think in season for basketball is, 7-8 months long. That's the longest training period, but most people don't train during that time, which is not good. Yeah. And I would tell you most of our gains happened in season if practice doesn't get in the way, right? Because practice is huge, because you never know where practice is going to go. But to have people be able to choose, because I think we as humans, we go to our most efficient ways. Even when you grab a barbell, we usually just go grab it and it's your most efficient way. But to have the option for people to either lift heavy one day or lift light, or just do it consistently, lift light consistently. That way you're at least working on the movement patterns that and the activation that we need. but it's tough. It's really hard. And yeah, because I look at movement as medicine, and I look at exercise prescriptions. And I could be a stickler on it, but again, I've been an injured athlete, and we follow trends, and you gotta know how you feel. You gotta listen to yourself. So it's I think it's important, and I think in season could be our biggest opportunity to offer programs to people, because most basketball people do not lift in season, and that's where I think we have our gains for sure.
Is that what you see with track athletes, Clint?
We only test, and this is just me. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but we only have like a true testing day outside of our baseline testing in the fall. We'll do one testing day before season starts, and then we'll hit so many training maxes. Like we'll hit PRs all throughout the season, depending on where we are. The majority of the athletes will PR multiple times during season, but not on training days specifically.
And that's where EliteForm is important, because we follow trends, and every day you can test every day. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you're testing or maxing, but if you can follow how people feel, because some days they feel differently than others, and sometimes they want to load, sometimes they don't. I let the people choose, the athletes choose, and man, if they're feeling good, let's go. If they're not, hey, we don't have to do it. Let's just do the pattern. And it's light, but we can get that data, look at it, and follow those trends. And I think testing days anymore, this might be unpopular, but I think they're a waste of time. I think EliteForm has taken over that market, in that every day is a test if you want it to be.
And the more testing you're able to do, the more you can actually make adjustments to your training. Like if I see an athlete be exposed to, we call it a 70K clean, and I see what that looks like, because it's a build up to whatever. I see what their power outputs look like, and one day they're just 300K or 300 watt drop off consistently. Hey, something's going on here. The weight's still moving. You still caught your 70K clean, but something's going on here. So for us, like we can see when things are going right, but also when something's not going right as well. So it helps us make better decisions. It gives us better questions to ask. Just getting more data and more exposures to those things, the way we see them.
If measurement can become so ubiquitous that we're no longer talking about testing days, that by itself might signal a little bit of a sea change, where it's now kind of truly about the process, instead of there's this one day and now I've got this other day that I have to hit. In terms of like where you see things going in terms of data collection, like let's go back to this with one of the things Hudy mentioned. Like, what kind of resources would you need to feel like you kind of had a better grasp around getting that data collected and making it actionable?
So I'm in this data visualization class right now, and we're trying to bring
personally are just trying to get better.
Yes, absolutely. I think that'll be huge, but we're looking at aura rings. We're looking at counter movement and balance on Sparta. We're looking at EliteForm. I'm looking at catapult data. How can we bring it all together? And it's probably not as, I don't know. That's the question. Like, are we doing the right things? And can we see response to what's happening? And is the response positive or negative? And it's going to be different for everybody. So how can we track that?
The cool thing about my setting is I work with so many different athletes. I think I have like 130 under my umbrella, but just specifically with track, I have about 100. So my sample size is huge, right? So it took a year and a half, 200 plus athletes for me to start to figure out what's actually important from the testing that we're doing. And we found out a lot of it didn't really matter. So we stopped testing. We stopped testing those things. We started to dial in the things that we did see mattered. And then as we got better at those things, then we were able to start to add a little bit more. I think as people grow in technology, a lot of people are testing the test and getting data to just collect it. And that is also a problem in my mind. So for us, if we're testing, we want it to add value. And sometimes you're not going to know right away, but once you get enough of a sample size, you can figure those things out pretty quickly. Like they'll stare you in the face, and it's pretty cool when you find something that does matter and is trainable, because that gives you like more bullets in your gun.
When you're, I'm sorry, Skip,
No,
go ahead. I was going to plug Dr. Kramer here. When you do a sport that involves running, jumping, twisting, whatever, and you're on your feet, Dr. Kramer will use the term structural kinetic strength. And if you have a weak link in that structural kinetic strength and it's not working for you, you got to look at that. And you can see it. You can see it with your eyes. But then, we can also have researchers and whatnot come in and take a look at it and try to correct it. But the kinetic structural strength, whole body systemic strength is what you need.
The cool thing about the technology at this point is, like she said, we can see it with our eyes a lot of the times. Just you get a coaching eye and you start to know what you're looking for and when things don't look right. And now that you can put objective data next to them, as you're training them, you can see if you're actually making the change that you think you're making. So that's the pretty cool thing for us now at the point that we're
And, I have a woman too, that actually she scores sometimes better than some of the men who have made it in the NBA that I've worked with. And that's impressive. To be able to compare what people do on the daily, rep per rep, in a competition mode, to know what that person's doing down there, that person's doing down there, and then to hold on to that number and take it 10 years into the future, not because somebody squats 315, but how powerful they are with 315 on their back is impressive to see. And that's what EliteForm does.
I'm sure you love the competition mode like you're talking about. You should see.
I do it every day.
My sprint group, as soon as we get in season, we turn that mode on, and they're just looking. Oh, you're beating me. I got you next. But you don't hear, oh, I just cleaned 120. You hear 2,300. Like that's what
yeah. That's cool. Awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Well, that just reminds me of I think I've seen both of you actually just jump in and get competitive with athletes.
100%.
And get under a bar yourself and light up a room like in your own way. Like, yeah, our stuff's cool, but at the end of the day, like there's culture, there's creative culture. Like you guys will both get after it. And you can just see that light up a room, and you can see people getting after it because of that.
The fact that athletes are talking about power output and watts and work and joules, like that's impressive. Not just, hey, how much are you lifting?
It's
obviously I'm jaded, but 100%, right? Like that's a score. Like
we have a couple tests that we do.
It's a score that actually has data behind it, and that's when it actually becomes a bit more meaningful, right?
Yeah,
like
100%.
Just this person over here knows the numbers.
Yeah,
it's like what we were talking about with Tiana. Tiana knows if she hits this number on a lift, it means she's going to crush it out on the track. And now it all starts to kind of fold together. So
there's a couple that like we have one for our throwers. I have one for my sprinters. I have one for like everyone, all my power athletes. And they just, like I said, they just finished up their testing. And he made it to the world championships this year. He's pretty talented. But he comes downstairs, he's got a big old smile on his face. Hey, Clint, they told me I beat your power output. I said, no chance. Let's go look at it right now. But it's pretty cool for us because like that's what they care about now is how explosive can I be.
And the beauty of it too is it's not maximal load.
Exactly. Safe.
Not even close to it.
Exactly.
That's what I love.
Yeah.
So you want to stay healthy and
weird.
Circling back to if you build the foundation right, you can start doing some of these fun things as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's relative, right? It's at the end of the day for track, super easy. If me and Skip are the exact same anatomically, we got the exact stuff going on. We're both the exact same strength. Doesn't matter. If he's a pound lighter than me, he goes faster. Right? That's we know that's how it works. So apples to apples, I can produce more than you. Hit me. So it's pretty cool for us.
100%. Anything that that's important to either of you on this conversation about athletic development that we've missed?
Sure, there's a lot.
Question for Hudy. How long is the longest you've trained an athlete? And do you also find it difficult to train them later in their training with you?
I'm glad you asked that because I made a note to come back to that, and we just didn't get there. So,
the consistency is not there, but I still work with athletes, and I actually had one of the men's basketball players call me the other day. Unfortunately, Connecticut isn't a destination place, right? Sure. I just actually saw Emeka Okafor, who was picked second in the NBA draft in 2004. Yesterday, he came by Stores, and he's still playing, but he was there with his family. We still chat. I chat training with all of them, but I'm not physically hands-on with them, because basketball's a little different.
For sure.
But I'm still training myself.
Yeah, you find it harder to train.
I'll give you an athlete I can't get away from.
I'm in my own head.
I love it.
So I don't know the answer to that question. Like when I was at UT, Diana Taurasi and I exchanged a few texts, but she's got her own people. Normally, the NBA guys have their own people, and
for better or worse.
Well, they have these. They pay people a lot of money to do a little bit of work, right? To specialize with stuff. So,
sure.
Very tactful answer. Very tactful. Well, hey, I got warned by my wife, like, with these two people, you're just going to get talking and you're going to have a 3-hour podcast. So don't do that. No one wants 3 hours. So I'm going to wrap us up, but I do really appreciate you both coming on. Hudy, I'm going to reserve the right to ask you on again, as you're probably well aware.
I would love to be. These are great. I learned a lot. I learned from both of you.
Avery asked me, like, if you're doing it remotely, how are you going to fit Malord into it? And I was like, well, I don't know, but we'll find a way. Clint is stuck coming on, like, co-hosting. So
I'll co-host. You never asked me. Apparently, Clint is the guy. So
I think the key word there is I haven't asked you
yet.
So, stay tuned. No, seriously, appreciate you both. Love you. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you both soon.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.